Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi. Good afternoon. Welcome to the annual MAYDAY Peace Conference. My name is Yuri Hong, and I'm a faculty member here in the Greek, Latin, and Classical Studies Department, and I'm chair of the MAYDAY Planning Committee this year. The purpose of the MAYDAY Peace Conference is to focus our attention on what each of us can do to build a more just and peaceful world, a goal that's made all the more important in these increasingly uncertain times. This afternoon, we spotlight the expertise and perspectives of our own Gustavus faculty to share their knowledge on the topic and model dialogue across personal and disciplinary perspectives. We want to illuminate the ways in which all disciplines together, from the arts and the humanities to the natural sciences and social sciences, contribute to a fuller and more honest picture of human experience than is possible through one discipline alone. In this ever-changing and complicated world, we need the mental tools provided by the liberal arts to help us explore from multiple angles the basic questions that we all have to grapple with as individuals, communities, and societies. Who are we? How did we get here? And what do we do now? That last question, what do we do now, is key, I think, because the liberal arts isn't just a prescribed set of disciplinary knowledge. They provide us with the skills that we're meant to put into practice, the practice of seeing each other, of engaging with one another, and learning how to take action together, so that we can do our part to build that more peaceful and just world. To get us started, I welcome President John Vollen to provide a greeting.
Good afternoon, everyone. At first, I'd like to start the conference with the land acknowledgement. So Gustavus Adolphus College is located on the ancestral homelands of the Dakota people, whose spiritual traditions include the belief that this land, along with the creatures and the people living on it, are their relatives. The Minnesota River and its watershed are sacred places. These waters and lands are interconnected with Dakota culture, language, creation stories, songs, and ceremonies. As a college, we seek to honor Indigenous people and communities by telling the truth about the history of our presence on this site. Over time and through sustained dialogue, we are building relationships and taking deliberate steps toward co-creating a better future for all. So again, thank you, Yuri. This is my first MAYDAY. I'm very excited about the annual MAYDAY Peace Conference. It's been going on for 45 years, since 1981. And it really got started with funding and vision from the late Florence and Raymond Sponberg. And we have two of the Sponberg's children here with us, Miriam and Anne. Would you stand up, please? Well, thank you for your continued support. MAYDAY is one of those, it brings up images for me. Of course, maybe one of the first ones is MAYDAY is the international distress signal, as we all know, indicating life-threatening emergencies. For me, and maybe I'm aging myself here a little bit, but I used to make MAYDAY baskets, and then we'd go to our neighbors and with little candies. Who else? Come on, hands up. Yeah. Notice whose hands went up in the room, just saying. But it's also the International Workers' Day. It's around many different, it has many different connotations, including in Sweden. And this year's topic, revisiting the Declaration of Independence, the 250th anniversary. Here in the state of Minnesota, and given everything that's been happening, I think there's real resonance here. We've been the epicenter of that role of federal, state authority, people's rights. And so I think this year's topic is particularly poignant, and I really look forward to it. So thank you, Yuri. Thank you for the organization of everyone that's been involved, and thank you all for being here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, President Vollen. The title of this year's conference is 250 Years of Democracy, Revisiting the Declaration of Independence, 1776 to 2026. And I want to just take a minute to reflect on the two parts of this title. That question mark at the end of 250 years of democracy is intentional. It asks us to consider the past, the present, and the future. To what extent have the last 250 years lived up to the promise of democracy? Are we living in one now? And what will democracy look like in the coming years? As someone who studies the ancient world, I'm also struck by how brief 250 years actually is. Democracy in Athens really was roughly 200 years, not even. And so what that says to me is that democratic experiences are fragile, and they're shaped and contested and reimagined over time. And because in moments of crisis, it's often helpful to go back to the beginning to ask, how did this start? Looking back to the beginning can be a roadmap for helping us consider where do we want to go from here. So the other part of our conference title is about revisiting the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution, which came later, but the first articulation of the principles that justified independence and set forth the ideals upon which this democratic experiment began. So I'm really excited now to welcome Professor Kate Aguilar in History, African Diaspora Studies, Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies, and Sport Management, a woman of many interests and areas of expertise, to provide an entry point for this discussion as we, the Gustavus community, take the time out of our busy schedules to reflect on how the founding ideals of liberty, equality, and self-governance have evolved over the past 2.5 centuries and what they demand of us today.
Thank you so much, Yuri. And thank you all for being here. I am really tickled pink to be doing this. I got to be honest with you. I was like, me? You want me to come up and talk? I'm honored to be standing in front of you today, and most of all, I'm honored to be talking about democracy through the lens of Black history. In 1944, the historian John Hope Franklin, one of the scholars who's helped establish Black history as an academic field, wrote a powerful but pretty short line. Democracy is essentially an act of faith. We included his essay, History, Weapon of War and Peace, in which he wrote this line, not just because it's significant, but because it allows us to practice what historians do. So nerd out with me for a second. I'm going to walk you through what historians do. So when we encounter a claim like this, our first questions are always about context, perspective, and evidence. So why would Franklin write this in 1944? And I invite you now to think about what was happening in the moment. The world was in the throes of World War II. Fascism threatened democracy abroad, and the United States presented itself as the defender of freedom. A global defender of freedom, I might add. At the same time, Franklin, like millions of Black Americans, was living in a country that denied him basic democratic rights. He served in a segregated military unit. Jim Crow laws, which designated Black Americans as second-class citizens, were laws of the land. Racial violence was widespread. Voter suppression was routine. So when Franklin called democracy an act of faith, he wasn't being abstract, and he wasn't being naive. For Black Americans, especially in the South, democracy, the right to vote, equal protection under the law, access to political office, meaningful participation in civic life, it was not a lived reality. It was something they believed in despite the evidence. Faith meant holding on to the promise of government of the people, by the people, for the people, even when that promise was repeatedly denied. As historians, we also think about positionality. Franklin wasn't just a scholar, he was a moral witness. His statement is both an interpretation of the past and a judgment about his present. How could a country that denied millions of its citizens full rights claim to be free? And then we test that claim. Does the historical record support the idea that American democracy has always been unfinished? Something people have continuously had to believe in and fight for. One powerful example that I talk about in my classes is that of the Black soldier. From the American Revolution through the Civil War and the World Wars of the 20th century, Black men fought for a country in which they could not fully participate. Military service became a way to claim loyalty, citizenship, and dignity in a society that often denied them all three. That contradiction is not a side note to American history. It's central to understanding it. Finally, what did Franklin mean by faith? He did not mean faith only in a religious sense, though Black churches and their approach to Christianity have long been central to the struggle to make democracy real. For Franklin and for many other Black public intellectuals, faith was action-oriented. It was the belief in what America could become if all people were willing to work for it. Franklin believed this because, to some extent, it had already happened. During Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877, that point right after the Civil War, Black Americans participated in and helped to lead a fully functioning multiracial democracy. Given freedom, citizenship, and voting rights, they did not seek revenge, as white nationalist mythology falsely and often repeatedly claims. They built public schools for Black children and for the poor. They helped establish public hospitals for Black and white families. They ran for offices and won and expanded democratic participation for women. They used their freedom to expand rights and services for all. Franklin believed in democracy foremost because he took America's founding ideals seriously, that power comes from the people, that the rule of law should apply to everyone, that certain rights are inalienable, and that institutions must be held accountable. He knew these ideals were possible because they had already been possible, even if briefly, not just for white landholding men. What made the United States noteworthy was not the perfect implementation of these ideals, but their possibility. As Franklin warns in his essay, history can be used either to justify destruction or to imagine something better. At its best, he argued, American history represented what he called a boundless faith in the potentialities of mankind, and he meant all mankind. From the beginning, the United States was not created by one race or one culture. That idea is a myth, one deliberately used to justify exclusion and violence. The reality is messier and more uncomfortable, as history always is. This nation was built through the forced and unequal interaction of Europeans, enslaved Africans, and indigenous people. What held it together was not shared identity. What held it together was a deeply held and contested ideal that rights are inherent to human beings, not granted by a king or a state. And yes, that ideal was immediately undermined. Liberty was declared universal while being denied to many, enslaved people, Native Americans, women, and the poor. And yet that contradiction has defined American history and fueled American activism from the outset. By writing We the People, the founders left the definition of who count powerfully unfinished, and generations of excluded people have responded and continue to respond in the same way. Game on. Black Americans, organizers, intellectuals, labor leaders, and freedom fighters believed that liberty could expand and must expand for America to fulfill its promises. That is why activism, not hate, not greed, not war, and certainly not retribution, sits at the heart of this American experiment. Activism is the engine that turns faith into action and action into change. This brings me to Frederick Douglass. Born into slavery, Douglass escaped, educated himself, and became one of the most powerful voices of the 19th century abolitionist movement, the movement dedicated to freeing the enslaved. What made Douglass radical was not that he rejected these ideals, it was that he claimed them. In his 1852 speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, Douglass honored the founders and the principles that they articulated, even as he forced his audience to confront the distance between those ideals and the practice of slavery. America, he argued, was defined by both freedom and unfreedom, and that contradiction demanded action. Now fast forward to today. Much has changed. Slavery is abolished, Jim Crow is gone, women can vote, marriage equality is the law. Many Americans recognize diversity as a strength. And yet we are living in a moment when authoritarianism and historical distortion are once again on the rise. The US was downgraded from a full to a flawed democracy in 2016. Fascism is not new to the United States, but it is born anew here and across the globe in this moment. We see the Constitution, we see the Declaration distorted, even disregarded at multiple levels of society. And so if you'll humor me, I want to end by sharing something personal. Because as Black feminists have taught us, the personal is always political. I've been teaching Black history for nearly 20 years. It is truly the greatest privilege of my life. And every day I enter the classroom at this moment, I wonder if it will be my last day. I wonder if this will be the last day to legally and formally tell these stories. And currently only about 8 to 9% of total class time in a K-12 history class for the whole year is dedicated to Black history. So it's an incredible privilege to be able to teach an entire class dedicated to it at the college level. And to be clear, the weight I feel doesn't compare to my Black and brown colleagues who not only have to deal with people claiming our field is illegitimate, but their very humanity in this climate. Alongside the struggle in my professional life, I watch my husband carry his passport back and forth to Gustavus to prove his Americanness. And I sit with the terror of my children who do not fit a white nationalist mythology of who constitutes a quote-unquote real American. I share this because I know the weariness that many of you feel. I do. I know the fear. I know the cynicism. I feel it too. I wonder what it means to teach marginalized histories in the moment when entire fields are being delegitimized and education is being co-opted by the state. I wonder what kind of world my children will inherit and my students. You don't need to belong to a particular party or to a particular identity to feel the weight of this moment. I am an American, and I know what it means right now to wonder if this country and this democracy at times is worth believing in. And it is now more than ever that I turn to John Hope Franklin. Yes, my best friends are historians. To Black history, to those who believed failed experiments do not mean we abandon the larger project. Every good scientist knows this. Political scientists, historians, statisticians, psychologists, librarians, we all know it. What history and Black history in particular teaches us is this. Democracy has always come with a question mark. It was never guaranteed. It is never guaranteed. The ideals behind it did not begin with us. Indigenous peoples created and governed in a participatory democracy long before the nation came to be. Indigenous people resisted on this land long before the United States existed. Black Americans, too, have resisted and rebuilt for centuries. Black Lives Matter activist Brittany Packnett-Cunningham recently reminded me that the beauty of Minnesota activism is this longevity. There were people here, she explained. There were strategies here. There were communities here, and those communities stood up. The land holds that memory. The people hold that memory. The language holds that memory. And Indigenous people in Minnesota have been passing that on for generations, as have Black people. These histories, these marginalized histories, give us a blueprint for this moment. And that blueprint, my friends, has always been love. It always has been. Love of self, love of community, love of history, and love of possibility. Black Americans have been given opportunities to leave this country again and again, but they have stayed. They have enlisted, they have fought, they have grieved, they have dreamed, they have written histories and imagined new and radical futures. They have worked to make this land more just, not just for themselves, but for all of us, because this land is our land. So if you're grieving today, know that I see you. It's okay to question what the next American story will be. It is okay to be worried. It is okay to be excited. It is okay to be angry. It is okay to be unsure. But the message of John Hope Franklin, my friends, is please don't disengage. Not now. Not with our current democracy at stake, because democracy has always been an act of faith, one that depends on our collective belief in an expansive freedom and a national political framework that can help make that possible. We, the people, get to decide that. We do. All of us. For this reason, like so many Black activists who had come before him and those who would come after, Frederick Douglass ended his 1852 speech not in despair, but in hope. In our Constitution, in our Declaration of Independence, in the founding ideals that fostered so many different American dreams. We live in an age of uncertainty, yes, but the question mark compels us forward. It reminds us that our greatest strength is each other. Exclusion, fear, and hate diminish us all. To love in a democratic sense, which requires a public commitment, not just private, a public commitment to the dignity, freedom, and well-being of all people, especially those who are different from you, requires imagination. It requires complexity, nuance, courage, faith, and action. The very skills you are learning here, I know you hear this in every class you take, the very skills you are learning here, sharpen them, use them, and let history guide you. Let care for one another compel you, and let faith in the unfinished project of democracy move you forward until we are together free at last, because I promise you, we will be collectively free at last. Thank you.
I don't know about you, but I think I need a minute. Thank you, Kate, for that powerful introduction. Wow. I want to now welcome the faculty panel up on stage. And as the panelists get settled, I want to encourage you all in the audience to turn to a partner and discuss for a couple of minutes and process what we all heard, because that was a lot. And I also want to just take a second to thank you all for being here and taking the time out of your day to hold some space for this important moment and this important topic, kind of, with your bodies and your attention right here. So turn to a partner and discuss, what are your top takeaways from the keynote? What do you think are the most important components of the democracy? And let's just take 2 minutes to do that while the panelists come up on stage. Thank you. All right. I hate to interrupt you, but if you're like, no, wait, I want to talk about this some more, that's a good thing. And I do want to point out that there are printouts of that article that Kate talked about right out there on the table for anyone who wants to actually just pick up a copy and peruse it while you're at dinner. And also, there's a QR code in the program. If you prefer to send it to yourself via email or read it on your phone or something, then you'll have access to it that way as well. So, all right. I'm happy to turn things over now to Professor Jillian Downey from the Math, Computer Science, and Statistics Department, who will moderate this discussion.
Thanks, Yuri. I'm loud naturally, so I don't really need a microphone. First, thanks to Kate, and as a side note, I am feel very special because I get to call Kate a friend and a colleague, and I think you can all see why I am so excited to be friends with her. So what a great way to get our time together started. Before we jump into our discussion, I would like to have each panelist introduce themselves, give their role at Gustavus, as well as provide any context or background information in terms of how you are going to approach the discussion of democracy. This could be kind of your area or field of study. This could be your lived experiences or anything related to your identity, anything that you think kind of informs your discussion. So as an example, I can start. My name is Jillian Downey. I teach statistics here at Gustavus. And I know very little about democracy. And when I know very little, I usually come to discussions asking a lot of questions. And so I'm going to be asking a lot of questions, and that's going to be kind of how I approach this discussion today. Ernest.
Bonjour, Anin, Ernest Briggs, Indigenikas. Let's start off with that real quick. Let's just do that. Everybody say Anin. Anin. That's a formal way to actually say hello in Ojibwe, for those of you that don't know. I am Ojibwe, member of the White Earth Nation from northern Minnesota, but I grew up in the Twin Cities my entire life. Now let's try another word, bonjour. Bonjour. That's actually a much more informal way. When you get to know people, you just say bonjour instead of saying anin. It's a really, really good word. Yeah, not much to say about myself other than I am a visiting assistant professor of theater performance teaching a lot of really great classes over there in improv, level 1, directing actually this semester as well. I noticed some of my directing students are in the audience, which is good, because I told them all about this, so that's a good thing. I come at this a little bit differently than most people. Also, in addition to all of that, I've worked professionally as an actor, a director, producer, writer occasionally. Writing is hard. I want everybody to know that right now in case you don't already know that. But I also come at this from a historian. I actually got a bachelor's in history in undergrad when I was at the University of St. Thomas. I'm a firm believer that it's actually people pushing historical movements forward. So when I saw that emphasized a lot in your piece, that actually meant a lot to me, because it's the people that are actually making things happen on the ground. And I am a firm believer in communities. I have a very different perspective on it that I can talk about if it comes up, organically, obviously, because I grew up in an indigenous household where we were taught different ways of living, even though we were living in an inner city. So, thank you. Miigwech. That's another Ojibwe word. Miigwech. It means thank you.
Hello, I'm Dan Mollner in the Library and Archives, and I think I'm approaching this topic from 3 different perspectives. First is my brief when I was hired as the government documents librarian, in charge of organizing and making accessible a huge amount of data that has bias from different administrations, but data that plays such an important role in our nation, in our social services, in our economy, and the like. And my second approach would be as a reference librarian, where I don't give answers, as many of you may be chagrined to have learned, but rather I see myself as a guide in helping students develop and cultivate information literacy, as we call it, which is the knowledge of how information is produced and the ability to look at it and consume it critically, and then to enter into the conversation of creating and advancing that knowledge. And the third way is as a citizen, as the grandson of immigrants who came to this country seeking a better life, who often face discrimination because of their background, as a first-generation student who was encouraged to ask questions, to challenge authority, and as an individual who just believes that our country is not perfect, but it is up to us to try to make it even more so.
I'm Lori Carsen Kelly. I'm a graduate of Gustavus, and then I earned my PhD at Columbia University in New York City, but came back to Gustavus in 1992 to teach in the political science department. I teach courses in political theory, law, and ethics. I was director of the Three Crowns curriculum, and I'm the current pre-law advisor. I come to this panel as a political theorist.
And then I'm Kate Aguilar. I'll keep it short and sweet. For me, I bring to it that, as Ernest said, talking about people movements, my degree is actually in Black Studies. And Black Studies is a degree that came about, a major that came about because of the student movements of the 1960s. And so it was students fighting to make sure that higher education represented them. And so there were student movements pushing for Black studies, Chicano studies, Asian American studies, and it was just such a radical thing, not only to push it through, but to be one of the first students at my institution to be able to get a major in that, to have a degree in Black studies. And at the heart of Black studies is theory and practice, so that what you learn, it is your job to go out and to put it into practice and to make the world a little better through the theoretical. And so I take that very seriously in my classes.
Great, thanks everyone. So as I mentioned, I don't know a lot about democracy. I apologize to my 11th or 12th grade teacher. I just went a little bit the numbers route. And so I needed a little reminder. And so I asked Lori to give us a little background about the Declaration of Independence in terms of like the philosophical approach from some of the authors.
English philosopher John Locke had a tremendous influence on the Declaration of Independence. In his 2 treatises of government, he opposed the prevailing theory of the divine right of kings that said we're all born under authority. He countered that before government, we were born free and equal, guided by a law of nature that creates rights to life, liberty, and property. To protect these rights, we form a government that seeks the public good. This government is limited, however, and it protects a sphere of society in which we are free to express our individuality and make our own choices guided by religion and morality. If our rights are violated, we also have the right to revolution, to overthrow tyranny and form a new government. Thomas Jefferson is thinking about Locke when he says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." We followed Locke in our American Revolution and the founding of the United States. Locke has a very expansive view of liberty, but his view of equality is not as apparent. Because of the economic inequality that we have in our society, his only remedy is private charity rather than redistribution of the wealth. The kind of inequality that we have in our society with respect to disparities of wealth threatens the idea of equal citizenship that both Locke and Jefferson idealized.
Thanks for that background, Lori. I really appreciate it. So when I'm thinking about democracy, it's a little bit easier for me to think about kind of what are the traits of a democracy. And so rather than list off what I think the traits are, today in class, I asked my students what they thought the most important trait of a democracy is. And shout out to the few of you I see, 10,000 bonus stars. They gave some really great answers. And I took notes on what they said, and some of the more common answers were free and fair elections, they mentioned voting, representation in some sort of fair or equal way, and many of them mentioned something about everyone's voice being able to be heard, right? And so I thought that those were really great ideas. So my question to the panel is, what do you think? What do you believe is the most or a few of the most important traits of a democracy based on your personal or disciplinary perspectives? Ernest, you want to get us started?
Sure, definitely. I'll jump right in on that. Your voice being able to be heard 100% is just the big concept. I come from an Ojibwe background. I've told a lot of people about that for many years. It's a very weird thing to understand when my family, I have 7 siblings. I want everybody to know that right now. Yeah, it's a big family, right? But we decide that, so if we make a decision to leave the Twin Cities to go as a big family up to like the Bemidji area into a tiny little village I'm sure none of you have never heard of called Nadawash, which is actually where my family originated from. When we make a decision to do that, we all get together as a family and we all sit in a big circle and we talk about like, so where are we gonna stop? What are we gonna do? Are we gonna do this really like cool thing along the way that sounds really cool? Are we gonna stop at this little water park or this little lake or something? We do that together as a group and we all talk about like, well, you know, I just had a kid. I don't really want to do that because I have a lot of nieces and nephews, mind you. But those are all a conversation that has to actually happen. Your voice has to be heard in that room so that we can plan the events and everything that needs to happen. I mean, people in my tribe have been doing that for thousands of years. It seems to work for us very, very well. Even though we've grown up in a westernized society here in the Twin Cities metro area, you know. But I would definitely say your voice being heard and then it being acknowledged and then it becoming a part of the plan that you actually have to implement.
I really agree with that. I think the aspect that strikes me the most about a functioning democracy, a well-functioning democracy, is a sense of collaboration. And with that sense of collaboration is listening to others and not always making decisions based on your own self-interest, but the interest of yourself as well as the collective. And I think if we focus on the collective and we focus on others, we learn more about ourselves and how we can benefit from that as well. So I like the sense of sitting in a circle and working together. I won't say that that's what always happened in my family, but
That's true. It doesn't happen everywhere.
Lori, what do you think?
Well, democracy depends on the consent of the governed, and we delegate our power to our representatives to act in our place, to govern by majority rule, and when elections are free and fair, our government has legitimacy. But when voting rights come under attack, such as the case with the SAVE Act, which would ban mail-in voting, restrict absentee ballots, enforce rigid ID laws that would require a passport or a birth certificate to vote, I think we need to take our power back and make our voices heard through nonviolent resistance. So when I think of democracy, I think of its activism. Gandhi, who led 300 million Indians to independence from British rule, said that the power always resides with the people. You may delegate that power for the time being to your representatives, but Congress has no power apart from us. He said civil disobedience is the storehouse of power, that an actual power is unleashed when we engage in nonviolent resistance. And this kind of power can not only neutralize violence, but it can transform a situation, releasing energy in ways that love and compassion often do. Not only do we refuse to hit our opponent, we refuse to hate our opponent. This takes courage, but courage is contagious, and I really believe that this kind of activism is the best part of our democracy.
Lots of people in agreement. So real quick, I did a decent amount of research in the last few days, but I did know what the SAVE Act is. So for those of you that maybe don't know, the SAVE Act was recently passed through the House of Representatives, and it is some restrictions on voting that would require either a birth certificate or a passport, right? That becomes problematic in a way that it matches your current name. Right? And so that becomes problematic if you are, say, like me. I changed my last name when I got married, so my birth certificate does not match my last name. I am lucky enough to be able to afford a passport, but those are definitely, there's hurdles to get that. And so you can imagine different members of our population kind of not being able to have access to those documents, right? So just in case anyone isn't aware, that is one thing I do know, so that's great. So what about you, Kate? What do you think one of the most important traits of democracy is?
So I'm actually going to build off of that by telling you why we got demoted from a full to flawed democracy in 2010, which will build on what you were saying about. So one of the things that the Economics Institute was looking at when, and even I will say, let me take us back one more step. So historians of Black history, we actually don't classify us as a full democracy until after 1965, when all Black Americans could vote. So let me just say, even from there is some discussion among historians and political scientists about what we define as a full and functioning democracy, if we hit a full and functioning democracy, and then one of the world organizations that tracked that put us on warning in 2010 and then demoted us in 2016, really looked at a number of things that are happening in the U.S., and one of those is the erosion of information, good information. So the rise of misinformation in the United States is a real serious threat. I highly recommend, if you are interested in more of this, whether you like him as a candidate or not. Bernie Sanders' new book has an excellent definition of oligarchy and what's happening in the US, and talking about how there are just a few corporations that are controlling all information in the United States. If you don't want to read the book, you can listen to him interviewed on the Trevor Noah podcast, which is really a great podcast anyway, and he will explain it. He will explain the tenets of the book. But so that is one, when we talk about free and fair elections, also the role of the press, the role of information. But in terms of elections, even in our country, one of the things that also got us demoted is that we are a country where if you are incarcerated, you can no longer vote in certain states. So 1 out of 3 black men in the state of Florida cannot vote anymore. And I'm only talking about the black population because that's what I study, but you can go and look at other populations as well. That's actually very distinct around the world. And so these are the kinds of things that now make us not a fully functioning democracy, according to not just one organization, but a number of experts.
And I think you bring up a good point when you talk about the put us on notice in 2010, right? So this is spanning multiple different administrations across the political spectrum. Yes. And another thing that happened was, Citizens United, which was a case that allowed people to donate a ton of money to PACs and then donate it to candidates. Whereas I individually can only donate $3,000. If I had $1 million, I could donate it to a PAC who could then donate it to a candidate, right? And so that is important. And that happened in 2010, yes, right? And so not all of this is, now. It's going back some time. And so I think that's a really important thing that you bring up. Go ahead.
I'd like to comment on something that Kate said, too. It's about information. And we have this sense that partisan information is inherently bad. And I personally disagree with that. I think partisan information is fine. It helps us decide what a party stands for, what individuals who align with that party espouse. But I think the problem that has happened with our media environment, with our publications, is the sort of the obfuscation, the confusion of who is creating the information and if it's truthful or not. And we've had a long history, certainly in the 19th century, of very partisan organs of publication. So people knew that this newspaper was aligned with that party, and this newspaper was aligned with that party. And we still have that in the 20th century with various magazines. You could come into the library and I could show you a left-leaning magazine and I could show you a right-leaning magazine. But I think what has happened recently is there's so much individual information that's out there. And we don't know, there's no vetting of that information necessarily. It's raw information, and that's where it's hard to make those distinctions.
So I'm hearing, collaboration, right? Everybody having their voice heard. I'm hearing activism, voting, everyone getting a chance to vote. And I love all these ideas, but I want to push back a little and mostly ask a question. And I apologize, Ernest and Dan. So when you're thinking everybody have a voice around the table, I love that, and I love the greater good. But then my mind flashes to faculty meetings. And I love getting together with my fellow faculty. But how do you get anything done?
Well,
Right, and so I guess my question maybe might be for you. In your culture, how does that get accomplished, right? How do you make it so you ever get anything done and you don't just talk?
Oh, you don't just talk. That actually does happen at faculty meetings a lot. I've noticed that from time to time. But also just in life, I say this to my students all the time if they've ever taken a class with me. I exist in the world of trying to break out of rhythms because it is just a tendency that we all have to fall into rhythms. So you have to break yourself out of it. That being said, structure exists for a reason. It's you know, even when I talk about those family conversations that we have, it's inevitable to talk about, oh, you know, how is this? How is that? And then you realize 20 minutes went by, and it's like, we have less than 40 minutes to really do the thing that we came here to do. So you have to have something that keeps you on task. You have to have something. You have to have a plan of action. You have to have something that keeps pushing you forward as well. I mean, structure exists for a reason, but you have to try and find your ways to break through that a little bit. I had an old professor who used to say this to me, you know, do something revolutionary every day, which I did today. And you all don't know that I did it. And I'll tell you what it was. There used to be governmental policy that said it was illegal for any Ojibwe person to learn their language. And I just taught all of you how to say Buju, Anin, and Miigwech, and you repeated it. You learned that today. There are still policies on the books in various other parts of this country that say that. But while we do that, we're preserving our language, we are doing good things with that, and we're doing a revolutionary act just by doing that today in this room. Break yourself out of your rhythms.
Well, the provost has received a number of cartoons and memes from me over the years about faculty meetings. But I, and my colleagues are probably going to shake their heads from the department, but I believe in talking, and I believe in listening to each other. and if things, quote unquote, don't get done, oftentimes it means they're not ready to be done. And we need to hear each other a little more. But the structure does help.
Yeah.
And the gavel gets banged on occasion. And then, you know, the school year is fast approaching and we got to decide what the hell we're going to do. So we do it. And that's like in my family. Usually my mother would stand up or she'd say a prayer. And it was like, okay, discussion is over.
That's true.
And then we can move on.
Yeah.
Well, I believe that deliberation is the way we sort out what we really believe and think. And that process is an important one, and it shouldn't be set aside, I don't think. I think that we find out who we are when we are expressing ourselves and we're getting feedback from other people. And so I think that deliberative process is really key to democracy.
And I would just add that, and then if you deliberate and you come to a choice and it doesn't work, that's where voting in all of its different forms. So I teach students about the Great Migration. After Reconstruction ended and Jim Crow was passed, one of the leading black leaders of the time told black Americans, stay in the South. He literally said, cast down your bucket where you are, don't leave. Let's work with white Americans and let's make the South work for us. And it didn't work. There was racial violence, there was lynchings, and then they were like, we're out. And they voted with their feet, and the Great Migration happened, and 6 million black Americans left the South, and they moved north, and what a phenomenal lesson. So, and I say this to students all the time, one of my favorite little acts of resistance, I know this is really nerdy, but one of my favorite acts of resistance is when urban planners make a sidewalk, and then somebody decides they don't want to follow that sidewalk, and they walk on the grass, and you see people over time will walk that path, and then the urban planner will come back in, they'll go, we should probably put a sidewalk there. Because you vote with your feet. You vote, you can physically vote, you can vote by not giving to an organization, not going to a certain place. And that is a way to then push that process where you show this isn't working for the collective. And then after that, change can happen too.
Okay, you convinced me. All right, okay. So thinking about the collective and the greater good, democracy often requires a balance between individual liberties and freedoms and collective good or equality, right? So what are, for Kate and maybe even Ernest, historical instances where we have seen this balance tested or instances where we've had troubles with this? Or, where do we see it being tested today? And how do we see this coming in the future? Anyone can start. Lori, go ahead.
Okay. When I think about the present tension between freedom and equality, I think of hate speech debates on college campuses. We have followed John Stuart Mill with his view of liberty in On Liberty, and he warns against society censoring opinion, the tyranny of the majority. He believes in maximum freedom of speech and that truth will rise if we allow all a fair hearing. So we need to include the speech that we hate because that dissenter may have part of the truth, or because we learn a lot when we're challenged to justify our own convictions. For Mill, the line between protected and unprotected speech is physical violence. But some argue that we should also take psychological harm into account. Charles Lawrence argues that we should ban hate speech on a college campus because it interferes with the right to an equal education. If we don't have this right to an equal education, we aren't able to move freely across campus without encountering hate speech. So liberty comes up against equality, and liberty has to be limited in that respect. But those whose liberty is limited can answer in turn that their liberty is infringed for the sake of equality. Gerald Gunther argues that we shouldn't allow the majority to silence the minority's speech, even if it's offensive to many. That it's precisely to protect speech on the political extremes that the First Amendment exists. Attempts to ban hate speech at public universities have come up against the First Amendment and its protection of freedom of speech. Those of us who are on a private college, campus, or university, we can decide for ourselves how to resolve that tension between freedom and equality. And we should do that, for sure.
That's a great example, and one I don't have an answer for. Anyone else have an example of this kind of tension between liberty and equality?
Well, I'd actually like to add on to Lori's point. I was telling the group as we were preparing, that's actually one of the biggest things I have changed my mind on, actually, in my life as a student and as a professor, is if you would have asked me maybe even 10 years ago if you should let somebody on a campus who's a white nationalist, for example, I would have said no. I would have said, no, don't do it. And now I have changed my mind because I think this is a really important balance of where cultural pressure comes in and where having somebody who comes onto campus, or if you're in a class, for example, I tell students, there's a lot of misinformation about your history teachers and about history classes that you're being forced to learn, but you're not. You get to take my class, and if you don't want to be in my class, you don't have to take it. And if you want to drop my class, you can drop it. Like, you have a lot of power as students, and we have a lot of power as people to push back on individuals and ideas that we don't believe in, and to show other people in that moment what it means to disagree. And as you said, we can disagree respectfully, but to be able to disagree, to be able to push back on ideas, I think these are cultural norms that are incredibly powerful and much more powerful than only legislating it. That being said, one of the examples that we talk about in history is two of the countries that have done reconciliation relatively well are South Africa and Germany. And you don't go to Hitler High School in Germany, right? You don't have to deal with Hitler iconography in Germany. And but again, in the US, we've also started to work on that through cultural pressure, through people saying, take down monuments to Jim Crow, take down monuments to Confederate soldiers, rename buildings. That is stuff that cultural pressure and the will of the people, instead of coming necessarily from the top down of the government, has been really powerful and has had much more of an effect than some of the more recent orders to put them back on.
And that attitude, to me, is dependent on knowledge, on information, on self-education. And this is why my colleagues and I strive to I hope, don't have much hate speech in the library, but to have various perspectives on an issue, perspectives that I may not agree with. And I really kind of cringe at having to buy something from that perspective. But I think it's valuable, and I think it's mostly valuable for young people like our students to have the opportunity to see those things and to interact with them and have a conversation with them.
I'll just add to that. It's a revolutionary act to educate yourself in general. My parents have told me that from a daily and consistent basis. Why do I have to do well in school? And my mom was like, because being educated is the only way to lift yourself up from where you are now. That is something that my parents hammered into my head from a very young age. But along the way, you're going to be challenged in that. I'm thinking, this story popped into my head while I was listening to everyone talk up here. Tim Altmeyer, who was a really great professor of mine when I was in grad school, I told him the type of characters I didn't want to play when I was in his class. These are the type of characters I didn't want. So what does he do for the first scene that he has to cast me in? He casts me in as one of those characters that I don't want to play. And I go, this is awful. And I went to his office hours, and I remember telling him, I don't want to do this. And he's like, you have to, because you're an actor. And I was like, why? And he's like, because everything starts with you not judging the character for who they are and where they come from. And that blew my brain up at that exact moment. It started this conversation in my head. I have to think like this character is doing. It's not who I am as a person. It's not their belief structures aren't mine, but I have to understand it. And then he told me this really weird truth that comes from acting. People always think that actors are really great liars. I don't believe that whatsoever. I think we're really great truth tellers. Our job is to show things truthfully in imaginary circumstances when we're around people. So, and if you walk out of that theater and you go, I really believe that you were a racist cop, which is something I've been cast as before. And I'm like, that is not my perspective, and that's not who I am as a person. But actors are also empathy machines. Our job is to look at the other's perspective that is across from us and hear it and actually let that resonate within us the way that it's going to resonate within us. And then make our judgments or have a conversation with that, because that's really what it boils down to, is having that conversation and engaging in that conversation.
Wow, great. There's a lot of love coming off this stage. So, and I like it. It's great. You mentioned education. Sure. And being educated. And that leads me to think about kind of these traditional institutions like, higher ed, like Congress, like all of these institutions that we're seeing more and more of a decline in trust towards, right? And so how much of this is healthy democratic skepticism versus a genuine kind of threat to stability? And should I join the skepticism, right? Where does this fall in terms of kind of, yes, it's democratic versus it's crossed some sort of line?
At the risk of being a cynic, you should always be skeptical.
I agree that you should definitely be skeptical of anything that you step into. But my father's a cynic, and he has been for many, many years. I always try to live in the optimism of the world, because I actually also believe that it's people that actually change things going forward. If the right people are getting together and making things happen, and even doing grassroots things just to be a little revolutionary every day, like just doing those little things actually can change things. And that makes me a little less skeptical and a little less cynical too, so.
I think our rule of law is being undermined in our democracy, and I find that very troubling. I'm thinking in particular of the indicting of political opponents by the Department of Justice. There were 6 legislators who made a video that told the troops that they don't have to obey illegal orders, and the Department of Justice tried to indict them on charges of seditious conspiracy. But the people fought back. The grand jury refused to indict. So ordinary people can help stop this kind of abuse of power. And we have our own Gustavus graduate, Joe Thompson, who resigned from the Department of Justice rather than investigate Renee Good's wife, Renee Good, who was killed by ICE. And so ordinary people can stand up, and I think we need to do all we can to strengthen rule of law.
Yeah. And I would just add for me, I mean, I like the word discernment. I think discernment's what we teach in higher ed. And I think, you know, looking at nuance, looking at complexity. But for me, there is a difference between discerning, being skeptical, and disengaging. I think activists across time have shown that righteous anger, there's a place, right? And there is a place for rest, absolutely. If you haven't read Tricia Hershey's Rest is Resistance, you should. But that also this idea of coming back, you know, picking yourself up, coming back, have communities that pick you back up and come back, because to fully disengage is to not believe that it's possible. And at the end of the day, the most oft-repeated phrase in Black history is keep the faith. Which is a shout out to Jesse Jackson, I just want to say. So, you know, over and over again, Black Americans would tell each other, keep the faith. And I think that part of that discernment is the belief that it can get better, and it will.
That's a great segue into kind of what do you suggest for me or for everybody here in terms of like a call or an action, right? So what is like a word or a phrase that is the greatest muscle a citizen needs to flex in order to support democracy? What do you recommend we do if we want to keep a democracy or make our flawed democracy back into a democracy? What should we be doing?
One word you said?
I'll allow a phrase.
I only need one word.
Okay, one word is great.
Vote. I don't say that often enough. And my grandmother, her name was Mary Lou Smith. She worked under the Nixon administration for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. That organization has such a very, either half the people in the indigenous community really hate it or the other half absolutely love it. And there are people I've met at powwows who are like, oh, I know who your grandmother is. And it's usually either they don't, or some of them also look at me and say, your grandmother was the first woman I met when I moved from the Mille Lacs reservation like 30 years ago. And she was the nicest lady. She helped set us up with housing. She helped do this. And I remember like 3 or 4 months after she passed away in 2004, my mother got on the phone with me and she called me up and she's like, are you going to vote? And my mother was actually going to give me a ride because I was actually of age to vote. And I was still sort of reeling. You know, I was a young college student, much like yourselves at the time, in my second or third year at the University of St. Thomas. And I remember just going, why is this so important? She said, because my mom just died. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, and my mom told me, do you know how hard it was for Native people in this country to get the right to vote? And how late it was in this country that we did get the right to do such a thing. And you have the right to do such a thing. You have to take advantage of that. And you have to let your voice be heard. And you have to educate yourself about the people that you want to see in those positions. That is the least you can do. That is what you can do to honor your grandmother right now. So my answer to your question is vote.
All right, before I go on to someone else, what about the individual that says, but I'm voting between and gross? What do I do? Right? Like, what about the individual that says, I don't, both options are terrible?
You can always write somebody in. That's what I tell everybody too. There's been plenty of stories about people who write in somebody else for a third election. Or why don't you run? That's what I tell everybody too. If you don't like the two options that are available, I think you should definitely get up and you should run. And I do mean that 100%. If you think you can do it better, you should get up and you should run and you should let your voice be heard. Because if you have better ideas than the two options that are actually standing in front of you, you should be the person in the room leading everybody. I didn't ask to be the leader of my family. I'm just a storyteller in my family. I tell everybody that. I'd be the person in the tribe if we were still living in, revolutionary times. I would be the keeper of the stories, but I tend to be the leader of my family because everybody just listens to me when I speak. But I tell everybody, I will do that if that's something that people want me to do, but it's not what I seek out to do. But if you do believe those options are terrible, put yourself on the ballot yourself and let somebody vote for you. And tell them that your opinion matters and why it matters.
Well, that's a great answer, thanks. All right, Dan, what's the muscle that we need to flex?
One word would be learn. 2 words would be inform yourself. And 3 is to be critical.
how would you suggest we learn, especially in this age of all the digital information?
Listen to it, read it, seek out a variety. Seek out a variety of opinions, and really think what those opinions are, and look at the stories behind those opinions and those proposals. Because, for example, the SAVE Act on the face of it sounds great. There's some marketing involved there that has a real handy word, and it sounds fantastic. Well, sure, I should be able to, show an ID. But when you think about it and you educate yourself about what is behind it and what the outcome will be, you may change your mind. You may change your opinion.
Thanks. Lori, what's the muscle that we need to flex?
I think it's protest. And I'm looking at Minnesotans' response to Operation Metro Surge, where 3,000 ICE agents were deployed to Minnesota. And the people organized a day of truth and freedom, where 50,000 to 100,000 people marched to -20 below weather to protest ICE activities in Minnesota. With that came a general strike where 700 businesses were closed. Gandhi used a general strike in his fight for Indian independence. You create what he called a day of prayer and fasting, but it was a day in which no work could be done. You withdraw support from the unjust regime by withdrawing your cooperation with it. And I think ordinary Minnesotans really have the eyes of the world on them, had the eyes of the world on them, and made their voices heard. And on February 12th, that was announced the end of Operation Metro Surge, and new funding for ICE is being held up in Congress. And so I think that power to protest and to do it nonviolently is probably the greatest power that we have.
I think it's important, and we talked a bit about this, so a little look behind the curtain here, but there's lots of forms of protest, right? So I had the pleasure of speaking with Ann Sponberg Peterson, and she told me about how her mom would go to protests. And I was like, gosh, I want to bring that up. That's really cool. And she correctly pointed out that her dad also did activism because he empowered her mother and supported her through those protests. So the supporting role is also a way to do activism. And then I thought about my student, who is a part of the Big Partner, Little Partner program. And this student is very apolitical, but came up to me and said, my little partner's mom can't leave the house because she's scared. How can I still be connected? I want to text the mom and say, I'll come to their house and play with the kid there or whatever. And I'm like, that's a form of activism, right? Even if you can't go to the big march, right? We can still protest, in other ways that may seem small, but are still fighting against what we believe is unjust. So I just think those are really good examples of protest that if you can't make it to the big march, what are other things you can do?
One of the things that struck me on those days of protest is I was driving around St. Paul, and I drove past a nursing home. And there must have been 15 or 20 elderly people in walkers and wheelchairs who couldn't go downtown, who couldn't go to any of the other protests, but they were standing on their balconies waving flags and blowing horns, and it really moved me to tears.
Yes, there's so many ways. It's amazing how involved, and I've been very proud of Minnesota. So I agree with you, Lori. Kate, what is the biggest muscle we can flex to support or bring back democracy?
Well, I was going to say read. I'm going to champion off of what Dan said too. So I think you should read widely. I think you should read experiences that are not your own. I think you should read across time and space. Read. I think that's a huge part of caring for another person's story, believing another person's story, recognizing the world is bigger than yourself. It's just such a powerful thing. Fiction, nonfiction. James Baldwin famously said that the more you read, you realize that your suffering isn't actually that unique. And once you realize that, it's a bridge, and it's a bridge into other people's stories. So I would say read, and then the other thing I would say is be willing to be uncomfortable. The great activism of history is often groups that link up together who actually disagree on a lot. And they know that after they achieve the one goal that they want to achieve, they're going to go back to fighting about the nuance of something else. But they link up because they know to get this across the line, they need to come together. So you can disagree about methodology, but if you're focused on the same message, link arms. Can I say one more thing? Along that, though, well, I think it's very valuable to be uncomfortable. Sometimes I think we push, especially young people, students, talk across the aisle, work across the aisle. I do very wholeheartedly agree with that, but I think in order to do that, that's actually where the story of your dad and mom is so important. I think it's important to have a squad. So when you go home or when you're with your friends and you're tired, you have people around you who radically see you and love you. I would not be the person I am without my husband. I met my husband, we were 18, 19-year-old kids, and I had never met a feminist before, and my husband was the most radical feminist. And every step of the way when I said, I can't do this, he said, yes, you can. Yes, you can, Kate. You can do it, you will do it, and you will change the world. That's what he used to say to me over and over and over again. And it empowered me to be where I am now. And I think, yes, be uncomfortable, but also surround yourself with people who love you and who see you. And if you don't have someone in your life that does that, I promise you there are faculty in this room, there are staff in this room. We love you, we see you, we will be that for you. And, lean on that. Lean on that as you work. You're going to fall, and we're going to push you right back up again to keep fighting.
I am by nature a little bit of a pessimist, but I've really enjoyed. I have really enjoyed my conversations with these colleagues. We've gotten to have multiple conversations before this day, getting in preparation, and they all come at this topic from a place of love, from a place of community, from a place of thinking about making something that isn't maybe great right now better. And I've taken so much of what they've said to heart, not even just about our country, but about my family, about Gustavus. Is like, I love these things. And so it is community, it is information, informing myself, it is activism, it is hearing people that make me uncomfortable, but also going back to my safe space that's going to make all of these places better. And so I just really thank these people for this positive spin. Are there any final words any of you would like to give to the audience before we turn it back over to Yuri?
You said the word already, but I just want to bring this word up again. Community. That word is such a very important thing because I think it's something that stretches beyond the United States. It stretches the humanity itself. Does this funny thing no matter where it goes and what it does. It creates communities wherever it goes. And the beautiful thing about communities is we have a tendency to take care of each other when we're in the right places and we're around the right people, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing to have empathy for the person that's next to you. It's a good thing if the person who lives just across the street from you says, hey, I'm going through a rough time. Can you come over and maybe drop by with your kids just so I have somebody to spend some time with and everything like that. Lean on your communities, especially during the hard times, is the thing that I always tell people. Go tell stories to each other. That's always a good thing to do. Every one of us doesn't consider ourselves a storyteller. That's not true. You have a story to tell to somebody next to you. So go tell a story to somebody. It's a good thing. But be a good community member and a good neighbor to the people that are next to you.
And I would just add, to do that too, and my students know, because I say this all the time, I'm not hating on technology, but let's put down our phones. Put down our phones, guys. And I don't think it's an accident that part of that 2010 moment is the rise of the loneliness epidemic. It's the rise of people feeling so alone. And when we feel alone, do we start to get told? To be afraid, right? To fear our neighbor, to fear each other. I think we just, good old-fashioned storytelling around the dining room table, around technology has a place, but it doesn't need to be in every place.
And part of being a good community member is fighting for your community, being that activist. So hopefully we can all find ways to do that, make our democracy better, make our community better. So thank you all.
Thank you. Okay. And before you leave, can I just share my little like dumb example of kind of like getting involved and all of that? When I first got to Gustavus, I like donuts. But I was not a morning person for 95% of my life. So I would get to the dining hall and the donuts would all be gone. I'd be like, where's the donuts? They're like, oh, we only have that in the mornings. And I was like, well, why is that? And so I put a suggestion, there was a suggestion box, and I put a suggestion for like, can we have donuts in the afternoons too? And they're like, okay. And so they did it. So if you ever enjoy donut in the afternoon, it's because I made that suggestion. But it was very, so dumb, right? But it was so empowering to be like, oh, sometimes if you just ask for something and you find out who to ask for why that thing doesn't exist, then if it's an easy thing, they're like, okay. And then it can change. And then over time, there were lots of instances where I was like, why is it done this way? And then when I was serving on a committee, why do we do elections this way? Could we maybe do them that way? Like, okay. Or let's talk about that. And then, so that's how you learn that you can make a suggestion. If something's dumb, something's unfair, something's wrong, you can find out who do you need to talk to make that change. Is there a reason why it's being done that way? And so that's where you understand the structures and the institutions and the players, and then you get to be in the room where it happens. That's how you make change. If someone asks you for your opinion, like on a survey about the liberal arts and the 21st century queer landscape, for example, if someone asks you to give your opinion on a survey, the people who are making decisions based on that survey are only going to hear those voices. So take those opportunities seriously and participate in that opportunity. That is all flexing a democratic muscle. So all of these things. Great. Thank you so much to our panelists. Again. And so that was really amazing. And these folks, they took their time out of their day to share their expertise, engage in conversation, and then also like be kind of like a little bit out of their comfort zone by having this conversation in front of you all, which we don't actually do that often in a very unscripted way. So I want to take a little time here to give you all a chance, you've been listening a lot, to think about, how does this all apply to you? So we're going to ask you in a few minutes to turn to a partner and engage in discussion. But before we do that, you'll notice on the screen there's a QR code for a feedback survey where you can let us know thoughts about this event, and we'll tweak the event to, based on your feedback. So you'll get an email to this link, but also pull out your phone and do it now. And while you're doing that, I just want to note that in the printed program, there's not only information about the conference and the panelists, but also the full Declaration of Independence. It's worth reading its entirety. It's a little provocative. There's some fire to it that I think maybe some things might resonate as you look through it. And then there's also this list of ways that you can take action in relation to this topic. This is by no means an exhaustive list. There's tons of different things that you can do. Lots of examples you heard from the. Is it? You don't have access. Oh, I'm so sorry. I will send an email out. I am so sorry. Technology, it's a blessing and a curse. I'll send an email out, but please let me know, or just send me an email. I'm Yuri Hong. I'm in the program, and let me know what you think about the event. So now, without much further ado, I'm going to ask you to turn to a person sitting close to you, introduce yourself if you don't know each other, share a piece of information that you're going to take away that you can tell all your friends who weren't able to be here. What did they miss that you're like, oh my God, you should have been there. There was this one time, there was this one thing. What's something that you would take away? And then what's something else you would like to think about? Go. 10 minutes.
Oh, thank you so much. I think so.
Hopefully I don't drop it.
Okay. Really quick, I hate to interrupt your conversations, but the QR code access has been changed. Yay, thank you, Barb. And I'm noticing a lot of people leaving. It's okay to grab some food, but before everyone leaves, I do want to just say thank you to everyone, especially to the Sponberg family again for your generous and ongoing support for the Mayday Peace Conference. Sincere appreciation to Kate Aguilar, Jillian Downey, Ernest, Briggs, Lori Carsen Kelly, and Dan Mollner. And to dining services, facilities, tech services, everyone who has helped make this event possible. This afternoon has been recorded and will be archived on the Mayday Conference website, so please share the link with anyone who missed this opportunity today. A more just and peaceful world begins with us, our community right here. You've already participated in strengthening that community just by being here, so let's get out there and continue doing this work. Thank you for taking this time in your day to be together. Let's keep going. Thank you.